We all sense that there is a problem with work in our society. A worldwide survey by Gallup found that only around 20% of employees were engaged with their job, meaning that the vast majority, around 80%, are disengaged, meaning they are bored or generally dissatisfied. This is a big deal because work takes such a huge part of adult life. In a work week, a full-time employee spends over half of their waking hours at work, assuming they get 8 hours of sleep. That's a lot of life drained away by something that they don't like. But it's not like being unemployed is better, as there's a social penalty to not working for those of working age. And even putting income aside, people generally want to be working and productive. So both employment and unemployment are soul-crushing for most people. Where's the escape? Sure, there are some who have the privilege or luck to work in their dream job, but they are the exception rather than the rule. Most people are resigned to view work as a necessary evil so they can make a living, while squeezing the things they enjoy into the remaining hours or in the weekend, though even that is cut short due to other obligations like meals and chores. There's never enough vacation days, right? But life does not have to be this way. Work was never meant to be something that we dread or hate. We are made to be productive and fruitful, and work was supposed to make us free, rather than trap us in bondage. Then why is our world so far from this ideal? It's easy to blame external factors like capitalism or the systems in society, but while there are issues there, that is not where the root of the problem lies. The real reason why we are alienated from our work is because we as a culture have the wrong attitude toward work. There is a big lie about work that is so pervasive and is almost guaranteed to make you miserable if you internalize it. I myself fell into this trap, and for years I didn't have the greatest relationship with work until my eyes were opened by a different perspective that I encountered from a certain book, which I'll be sharing with you. The book wasn't about career or economics, but it was a book about theology written around the time of the Second World War. It is Letters to a Diminished Church, a collection of essays arguing why Christian doctrine actually matters in modern life, to a society which had largely forgotten its relevance. The author is Dorothy L. Sayers, a prolific English writer who originally gained prominence for her detective fiction, and was good friends with big names like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. Work is talked about in only 2 chapters of this book, but she hits the bullseye in diagnosing what is wrong with how we think about work. It's a topic she's passionate about, as she says. It may well seem to you, as it does to some of my acquaintances, that I have a sort of obsession about this business of the right attitude to work. But I do insist upon it, because it seems to me that what becomes of civilization after this war is going to depend enormously on our being able to effect this revolution in our ideas about work. Unless we do change our whole way of thought about work, I do not think we shall ever escape from the appalling squirrel cage of economic confusion in which we have been madly turning for the last 3 centuries or so, the cage in which we landed ourselves by acquiescing in a social system based on envy and avarice. According to her, the stakes of this are very high, having civilizational consequences. So what is this big lie about work identified as the root of our problems? It's an attitude that is so common and mundane that it's almost weird not to believe it, at least subconsciously. The lie is that the purpose of work is to make money, or the thing you do to earn a living. This thought is the reason behind why we hate work, and also why our economy feels so broken. But you might be thinking, how is that a lie? What's wrong with that? Isn't it just obvious? I don't blame you for thinking like this, since we're conditioned to believe this lie from a young age. The goal of our time in education was always to get a job so we can make money and secure a middle-class existence. Though it's understandable, this belief is still wrong and has disastrous consequences. Here's what the book says about it. The modern tendency seems to be to identify work with gainful employment. And this is, I maintain, the essential heresy at the back of the great economic fallacy that allows wheat and coffee to be burned and fish to be used for manure, while whole populations stand in need of food. The fallacy is that work is not the expression of man's creative energy in the service of society, but only something he does in order to obtain money and leisure. The connection between the big lie and economic waste may be difficult to see at first, but if money is what work is about, it subtly primes workers and businesses into a more selfish mindset rather than a giving or service mindset, where they are willing to cut corners to optimize their profit, even at the cost of quality or negative side effects on others or the environment. They don't need to care about their responsibility of what they're doing, as long as they're getting paid. This is why there is so much low-effort slop out there, especially in entertainment, and the reason why Hollywood can't seem to make a meaningful movie, or why social media is littered with AI and brain rot. It's all a cynical scheme to make money, and they succeed to the detriment of the consumer and society. The only way to avoid this is for the worker to have a motivation of giving, which is lost. The book summarizes this state of affairs. The greatest insult which a commercial age has offered to the worker has been to rob him of all interest in the end product of the work and to force him to dedicate his life to making badly things which were not worth making. The author further explains the mentality that arises from treating work as a means to gain. A very able surgeon put it to me like this. What is happening, he said, is nobody works for the sake of getting the thing done. The result of the work is a byproduct. The aim of the work is to make money to do something else. Doctors practice medicine not primarily to relieve suffering, but to make a living. The care of the patient is something that happens on the way. Lawyers accept briefs not because they have a passion for justice, but because the law is a profession that enables them to live. The reason, he added, why men often find themselves happy and satisfied in the army is that for the first time in their lives, they find themselves doing something not for the sake of pay, which is miserable, but for the sake of getting the thing done. This was written over 80 years ago, but we can see that little has changed in the modern day. Aside from economic consequences, working for the sake of pay makes people miserable, which is why 80% of workers are disengaged currently. However, it's also highlighted that satisfaction in work is possible when one has a different motivation than money, like serving a higher cause or defending their country during World War II. Pay may be there, but it is a secondary concern. Another example of the healthier approach to work would be hobbies, where one is intrinsically motivated to spend a lot of time and effort on something that they are passionate about, caring about the work's quality without any concern of compensation. Sayers continues in describing the change of thinking that we need. The habit of thinking about work as something one does to make money is so ingrained in us that we can scarcely imagine what a revolutionary change it would be to think about it instead in terms of the work done. To do so would mean taking the attitude of mind we reserve for our unpaid work, our hobbies, our leisure interests, the things we make and do for pleasure, and making that the standard of all our judgments about things and people. We should ask of an enterprise, not, will it pay, but, is it good? Of a man, not, what does he make, but, what is his work worth? Of goods, not, can we induce people to buy them, but, are they useful things well made? Of employment, not, how much a week, but, will it exercise my faculties to the utmost? We don't even realize how much the big lie affects our whole value system and turns us into more materialistic people. When I talk about materialism, I'm not merely talking about desiring wealth and material goods, though that element is there. No, materialism is the philosophy that matter is the only reality, and that every problem should be analyzed from a material perspective. It heavily de-emphasizes the spiritual, or the intangible parts of life. This way of thinking views humans as economic units, or cogs in a machine where you insert the input and you get the output. It is not only people that are treated as disposable, but animals, products, and our environment. Again, we might think of capitalism, which certainly has materialistic assumptions underpinning it, but its rival ideology, communism, also analyzes economics and humanity through a materialistic lens, and with its bad track record, it cannot be the solution. The problem with materialism is that it simply isn't true. There's more to being a human than an economic unit. We are not only material beings, but spiritual ones. If we ignore fundamental parts of human nature, then it should be no surprise that so many of us feel miserable, disengaged, and alienated by the system. But even Christians, who claim to know better about the spiritual dimension to reality, have conformed themselves to the patterns of this world and have adopted a materialistic frame when it comes to work and economics, as the book points out. The unsacramental attitude of modern society to man and matter is probably closely connected with its unsacramental attitude to work. The Church is a good deal to blame for having connived at this. From the 18th century onwards, she has tended to acquiesce in what I may call the industrious apprentice view of the matter. Work hard and be thrifty, and God will bless you with a contented mind and competence. This is nothing but enlightened self-interest in its vulgarest form, and placed directly into the hands of the monopolist and the financier. Nothing has so deeply discredited the Christian Church as her squalid submission to the economic theory of society. Materialism, or what she calls the economic theory of society, is not true, and we are oppressed and spiritually in bondage because we live by a system built on false assumptions that neglects our true nature. However, this incompatible state of affairs is unsustainable and cannot last forever. There will be a reckoning where false ideas will be exposed and collapse in a harsh process. The writer associates World War II, which was going on at the time, with this kind of event. A society in which consumption has to be artificially stimulated in order to keep production going is a society founded on trash and waste, and such a society is a house built upon sand. It is interesting to consider for a moment how our outlook has been forcibly changed for us in the last 12 months by the brutal presence of war. War is a judgment that overtakes societies when they have been living upon ideas that conflict too violently with the laws governing the universe. People who would not revise their ideas voluntarily find themselves compelled to do so by the sheer pressure of the events which these very ideas have served to bring about. Events like war or big economic crashes can cause the status quo to change very quickly, as the illusion of comfort gets dispelled. The author notes a quick shift in values in her British society, forced upon by the war. Do you realize how we have had to alter our whole scale of values now that we are no longer being urged to consume, but to conserve? We have been forced back to the social morals of our great-grandparents. When a piece of lingerie costs 3 precious coupons, we have to consider not merely its glamour value, but how long it will wear. Though war is brutal, it does return people towards more true ways of thinking and living. One of the things that was corrected was society's attitude to work. It broke the big lie, as she writes. It is quite true that false economics is one of the root causes of the present war, and one of the false ideas we had about economics was a false attitude both to work and to the goods produced by work. This attitude we are now being obliged to alter under the compulsion of war, and a very strange and painful process it is in some ways. It is always strange and painful to have to change a habit of mind, though, when we have made the effort, we may find a great relief, even a sense of adventure and delight, in getting rid of the false and returning to the true. When civilization is on the line, money and profits just do not matter as much, and there is increased importance on the intrinsic value of the work itself. Sayers explains how the war changed their attitudes. In war, production for wasteful consumption still goes on, but there is one great difference in the goods produced. None of them is valued for what it will fetch, but only for what it is worth in itself. The gun and the tank, the airplane and the warship have to be the best of their kind. A war consumer does not buy shoddy. He does not buy to sell again. He buys the thing that is good for its purpose, asking nothing of it but that it shall do the job it has to do. Once again, war forces the consumer into a right attitude to the work. And, whether by strange coincidence, or whether because of some universal law, as soon as nothing is demanded of the thing made but its own integral perfection, its own absolute value, the skill and labor of the worker are fully employed and likewise acquire an absolute value. The fact that the big lie of work being about money can be discarded even temporarily in times of war shows that it is not a fundamental part of existence, even if it seems inevitable and something we take for granted. It is possible to live without it. But if we're not forced to change into a better view of work, would we voluntarily choose it and give up our materialistic ways? This is the key question Sayers confronts her audience with. The question that I will ask you to consider today is this. When the war is over, are we likely, and do we want, to keep this attitude to work and the results of work? Or are we preparing, and do we want to go back to our old habits of thought? Because I believe that on our answer to this question, the whole economic future of society will depend. She elaborates further. Shall we want to go back to that civilization of greed and waste, which we dignify by the name of a high standard of living? I'm getting very much afraid of that phrase about the standard of living. Unfortunately, we are sitting over 80 years in the future, and we know that society ultimately chose to return to the ways of greed, consumerism, and waste after the war. And we are now probably even worse than when these words were being written. The temptation of money and comfort was too strong. Though there is a high standard of living, we are also more miserable than ever, with skyrocketing depression and mental illness, because how we are living is incompatible with who we are. And just like in the past, there will be a harsh judgment in some way to correct this. The powers will try to delay it for as long as possible, but they cannot avoid it forever. But even if society is under the spell of materialism, we do not have to follow these patterns, as the book argues. We could, you and I, bring the whole fantastic economy of profitable waste to the ground overnight, without legislation and without revolution, merely by refusing to cooperate with it. I say we could. As a matter of fact, we have, or rather, it has been done for us. If we do not want it to rise up again after the war, we can prevent it simply by preserving the wartime habit of valuing work instead of money. The point is, do we want to? I hope at this point that you should want to. It is worth it for us to build our lives on the firm foundation of truth, even if it is painful to change our mindset. So far, I've talked a lot about the lie of work being about money, and its far-reaching consequences on both the individual and society as a whole, but I haven't spent as much time on its alternative, or what exactly the right attitude of work should be. A positive vision is needed to displace the lie and motivate a lasting change. We need a philosophy, or a theology, of work. The book explains the need this way. But I believe that there is a still more important and fundamental question waiting to be dealt with, and that is what men in a Christian society ought to think and feel about work. Curiously enough, apart from the passage in Genesis that suggests that work is a hardship and a judgment on sin, Christian doctrine is not very explicit about work. I believe, however, that there is a Christian doctrine of work, very closely related to the doctrines of the creative energy of God and the divine image in man. It is true that the Bible never explicitly spells out how we should think about work, but there's a lot we can derive, even from the opening pages. So let us build up our understanding, and by the end, you will see a compelling vision of work unfolding that will free us from our economic bondage. The first time work is mentioned in the Bible does not refer to humans, but God's work in creation. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. God creating the universe is framed as work here. God is a creative being and expresses it by transforming chaos into order. We see that he takes pride and satisfaction in his work, as it says here. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Also on the sixth day, God creates humans in his image and likeness, which is where we come in. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. What does this mean? The image of God is a very deep idea and has many implications, one of which is that we are meant to be creative like how God is creative. One of the first things that God does with us is assign us to work. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. The Garden of Eden is also known as paradise, and represents the state of man having a harmonious relationship with God without sin to separate us. This was a place of abundance, and we should note in this verse that work is associated with this ideal state, and Adam wasn't working for wages or money. It wasn't even in the picture, which means that working in itself is a fundamentally good thing. In a perfect world, we would not be idle, but at work. This idea is counter to how we generally think about work in our culture, where people can't wait to get out of work and dream of being so rich that they can escape their work entirely. But this impulse to escape work is not entirely irrational, because we are not living in paradise, and work is truly terrible sometimes. We are living in exile because of humanity's rebellion against God, and it affected the quality of our work. This was the consequence that was pronounced to the man. And to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain, or toil, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you are taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Instead of working in a state of abundance, we would be working for survival, making the work less pleasant and a lot more stressful. However, this doesn't change the fact that work is good, and one of the chief blessings we can enjoy in this world. This passage in Genesis 3 is alluded to in a passage from Ecclesiastes, which states that we can still rejoice in our work, even in the vanity of life after the fall. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward, and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? In the same chapter, work is even stated to be a gift of God, or God's grace. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Work continually is celebrated. We can see in all this that the Bible has a very high view of work. It is something that we are explicitly made for, and a divine task that even God engages in. It is a gift in itself that we can take pleasure and satisfaction in, and not meant as a means to something else. So the vision of work that we can derive is a sacramental attitude to work, or treating work as sacred. The book elegantly summarizes this perspective. What I urged then was a thoroughgoing revolution in our whole attitude to work. I asked that it should be looked upon not as a necessary drudgery to be undergone for the purpose of making money, but as a way of life in which the nature of man should find its proper exercise and delight, and so fulfill itself to the glory of God. That it should, in fact, be thought of as a creative activity undertaken for the love of the work itself, and that man, made in God's image, should make things, as God makes them, for the sake of doing well a thing that is well worth doing. When I first encountered this idea, it was like a breath of fresh air. Imagine if we actually got excited for the activity which takes up half of the work week, instead of it being something we dread, where work is meaningful rather than a necessary evil we tolerate. That is what can happen when we arrive at the right attitude toward work. However, our modern world was not built with this idea of work in mind. The big lie doesn't just infest our values, but the systems of employment that we inhabit. A lot of things would be flipped upside down if society held to this view of work, but this is the revolution that needs to happen. As the book says, if man's fulfillment of his nature is to be found in the full expression of his divine creativeness, then we urgently need a Christian doctrine of work, which shall provide, not only for the proper conditions of employment, but also that the work shall be such that a man may do with his whole heart, and that he shall do it for the very work's sake. But we cannot expect a sacramental attitude to work, while many people are forced, by our evil standard of values, to do work that is spiritual degradation, a long series of financial trickeries, for example, or the manufacture of vulgar and useless trivialities. The difference of mindset between work being about the money and work being about the work seems very small and simple, but if we really take this new idea seriously, there are many big implications that will unfold about how we think about employment in our society, like a single domino falling at the start, causing a huge chain reaction. Our author, Dorothy Sayers, writes about 3 massive paradigm shifts that would result from this new way of thinking about work. I should like to put before you 2 or 3 propositions arising out of the doctrinal position which I stated at the beginning, namely, that work is the natural exercise and function of man, the creature who is made in the image of his creator. You'll find that any one of them, if given in effect everyday practice, is so revolutionary, as compared to the habits of thinking into which we have fallen, as to make all political revolutions look like conformity. Let's jump into the first one, which is that work is its own reward. The first, stated quite briefly, is that work is not primarily a thing one does to live, but the thing one lives to do. It is, or it should be, the full expression of the worker's faculties, the thing in which he finds spiritual, mental, and bodily satisfaction, and the medium in which he offers himself to God. If our thesis about work is true, then the notion of living to work is actually more correct than working to live. Within work is its own reward. This is how she backs up this idea. That, in practice, there is this satisfaction is shown by the mere fact that a man will put loving labor into some hobby which can never bring him any economically adequate return. His satisfaction comes, in the godlike manner, from looking upon what he has made and finding it very good. He is no longer bargaining with his work, but serving it. It is only when work has to be looked on as a means to gain that it becomes hateful. For then, instead of a friend, it becomes an enemy from whom tolls and contributions have to be extracted. What most of us demand from society is that we should always get out of it a little more than the value of labor we give to it. By this process, we persuade ourselves that society is always in our debt, a conviction that not only piles up actual financial burdens, but leaves us with a grudge against society. When we view work like it owes us something, we stop being satisfied by it, and the relationship turns toxic and transactional. This mindset makes us evaluate opportunities by which of them we can extract the most out of, that is, which pays the highest, when rather we should be looking for work that suits us the best, where we can use our talents to contribute well. She elaborates. At present, we have no clear grasp of the principle that every man should do the work for which he is fitted by nature. The employer is obsessed by the notion that he must find cheap labor, and the worker by the notion that the best paid job is the job for him. Only feebly, inadequately, and spasmodically do we ever attempt to tackle the problem from the other end and inquire, what type of worker is suited to this type of work? People engaged in education see clearly that this is the right end to start from, but they are frustrated by economic pressure and by the failure of parents on one hand and employers on the other to grasp the fundamental importance of this approach. Being too concerned about pay has pushed many people out of work that they would enjoy into work that pays well, but they hate. However, if work is its own reward, then what role does money play in this new paradigm? This is tricky because focusing on money corrupts the work, yet if we don't have money, then we don't live. However, we must choose one to be more important, sacred work or money. As it is written, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. If we serve God by serving our work, then we cannot do that while also serving money. Society has often chosen money and sacrificed the quality of work. But if we want to align ourselves with the true nature of work, then we must sacrifice money in the equation. But what is the point of work that you're passionate about or are suited to if it doesn't provide you with the income you need? How then will we live and eat? The only solution is that we must have faith that God will provide for our needs. The root of the big lie and the injustice, exploitation, and spiritual poison that results is simply because our society lacks trust in God. Ironic, given the words which are on the money. But here's how the book addresses the money question. There is, for instance, the question of profits and remuneration. We have all got it fixed in our heads that the proper end of work is to be paid for, to produce a return in profits or payment to the worker which fully or more than compensates the effort he puts into it. But if our proposition is true, this does not follow at all. So long as society provides the worker with a sufficient return in real wealth to enable him to carry on the work properly, then he has his reward. For his work is the measure of his life, and his satisfaction is found in the fulfillment of his own nature, and in contemplation of the perfection of his work. It's true that the economy is not currently designed to accommodate this view of work. However, one of the big mindset shifts is that we don't actually need to get rich from our work. We don't always have to be in the most in-demand positions or fields so that we can keep up with the Joneses. We only need enough to survive, and anything more is a bonus. As it is written, but if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Money is not the reward of work. The satisfaction from the work itself should be its primary reward. But if work is its own reward, then the way we think about rest and leisure also has to change. A third consequence is that, if we really believe this proposition and arranged our work and our standard of values accordingly, we should no longer think of work as something we hasten to get through in order to enjoy our leisure. We should look on our leisure as a period of changed rhythm that has refreshed us for the delightful purpose of getting on with our work. True life is not in the weekends and holidays, but primarily in the work period itself. This means that we should be seeking to do good work more, and not less, which is contrary to how so many people talk about their work today. The author elaborates. It would turn topsy-turvy all our notions about hours of work, rates of work, unfair competition, and all the rest of it. We should all find ourselves fighting, as now only artists and members of certain professions fight, for precious time in which to get on with the job, instead of fighting for precious hours saved from the job. In light of this, we can see that well-meaning ideas like early retirement, or the 4-day work week, or basic income are misguided, because the underlying assumption is that work is a necessary evil that weighs us down, rather than something that we are fulfilled by. It's a sorry state of our society that so many people want to work as little as possible, when it is meant to be a gift of God. This is the fruit of the big lie. But it is true that exploitative work or boring work does not feel good to do, and this leads us to the next point. A fourth consequence is that we should fight tooth and nail, not for mere employment, but for the quality of work we had to do. We should clamor to be engaged in work that was worth doing, and in which we could take pride. The worker would demand that the stuff that he helped to turn out should be good stuff. he would no longer be content to take the cash and let the credit go. We hear so much about unemployment and how we need to get everyone employed, yet focusing on the unemployment rate blinds us to the quality of the jobs. As we can see, just a small change in our attitude can turn a lot of things upside down. But this is only the first of the paradigm shifts. There are two more. The second is that secular work is just as sacred as religious work. The book describes it this way. My second proposition directly concerns Christians as such, and it is this. It is the business of the church to recognize that the secular vocation, as such, is sacred. Christian people, and particularly perhaps the Christian clergy, must get it firmly into their heads that when a man or woman is called to a particular job of secular work, that is as true vocation as though he or she were called to specifically religious work. We tend to think of religious professions like the pastor, priest, evangelist, or missionary as set apart or holier than other kinds of work, since they are explicitly devoting themselves to serve God, compared to other jobs which are more about making a living. But this separation is artificial in light of our new elevated view of work. The book continues the thought. It is not right for her, the church, to acquiesce in the notion that a man's life is divided into the time he spends on his work and the time he spends in serving God. He must be able to serve God in his work, and the work itself must be accepted and respected as the medium of divine creation. In nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as in her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments, and is astonished to find that, as a result, the secular work of the world is turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious, or at least uninterested in religion. When work is merely treated as means of gain, it's no surprise when it gets exploited to the max and everyone tries to take the most out of it while giving the least. It's all about the money. But if work and religion are not separate compartments, and work is actually a sacred activity, then there are duties and standards of excellence that we should expect. Slop would no longer be acceptable. The only reason we tolerate mediocrity or worse is because we have such a low view of work. She writes, the church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. This blind spot explains why religious media tends to be bad in recent times, which is strange, since Christianity used to produce some of the best art ever when it comes to writing, music, architecture, and paintings. Now it has the reputation of being a knockoff of secular media, made for the purpose of cashing in on the religious market. What happened? We as a community stopped valuing technical competence and excellent work, as much as the objective of propagandizing people with morally clean and feel-good messages. This phenomena of bad religious works also existed in Sayers' day, where she writes, the right kind of actor with no morals would give a far more reverent and seemly performance than a saintly actor with the wrong technical qualifications. The worst religious films I ever saw were produced by a company which chose its staff exclusively for their piety. Bad photography, bad acting, and bad dialogue produced a result so grotesquely irreverent that the pictures could not have been shown in churches without bringing Christianity into contempt. God is not served by technical incompetence, and incompetence and untruth always result when the secular vocation is treated as a thing alien to religion. The fact that we tolerate this stuff is an indictment on our low standards. Work needs to be true to itself and good by its own standards before it can capture truth and shine a light. We know God himself values technique and competence, as we see when he wanted his tabernacle built. The Lord said to Moses, see, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stone for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. This is described as a calling, where Bezalel was called within his trade as a craftsman, and not outside of it. This craft is as noble to God as any priestly role. After all, how would God be glorified by a half-baked tabernacle? We also see God empowering them to do great work by sending his Spirit, so they are not alone in their task. Likewise, we should engage in our work with knowledge that there is a spiritual dimension to it, where we do the best work we can to the glory of God. and God will enable us to do it well. The book summarizes this point. She, the Christian Church, has forgotten that the secular vocation is sacred, forgotten that a building must be good architecture before it can be a good church, that a painting must be well painted before it can be a good sacred picture, that work must be good work before it can call itself God's work. There's one more revolutionary idea we will explore from this restored vision of work, which is that the primary duty of a worker is to serve the work itself. The work doesn't serve us, but we serve the work. We can derive this principle from the Garden of Eden verse we looked at earlier, where the word translated work is actually avad, which means to serve. However, we can see that the service is not to the animals or the woman, but to the ground, or being devoted to the work itself. He is not doing it for anybody else, besides perhaps God, though others may benefit from it. An unintuitive insight that follows is that when we work, it is not primarily about pleasing a client, boss, audience, or community, even if they are the ones who give the compensation or evaluation of the work. The focus should be on simply delivering the best work you can. The book puts it this way. There is, in fact, a paradox about working to serve the community, and it is this: that to aim directly at serving the community is to falsify the work. The only way to serve the community is to forget the community and serve the work. What is the problem with trying to serve the community? The issue is that when we focus on what others think, it corrupts the integrity of the work, which usually results in a worse output. Instead, we should engage in our work wholeheartedly, like described here. The work takes all and gives nothing but itself, and to serve the work is a labor of pure love. And here's another quote. He is not there to serve you. He is there to serve God by serving his work. Make something that you're proud of without thinking of how you are evaluated, which will make you self-conscious. This kind of instruction is also given in the Bible, in the letter to the Colossians. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service, as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. There will be a reward to good service, though the service is not directed towards other humans, even their master or employer, but to a higher divine purpose. Being a people pleaser focused on appealing to others falsifies the work because the focus is more about being seen in a good light rather than being excellent all the time, even when we aren't seen. This attitude is behind why people take credit for others' work, or why some people only try hard when the higher-ups are paying attention. Also, if we seek to please others, we would become resentful and bitter when we feel like we aren't getting the recognition we deserve. It distorts our motivation, which distorts the work itself. The book summarizes the dynamic. If your heart is not wholly in the work will not be good, and work that is not good serves neither God nor the community. It only serves mammon. Sayers gives an example of this with artists that try to appeal to the market and capture public demand, which often does not work as intended. Public demand is a changeable thing. 9/10 of the bad plays put on in theaters owe their badness to the fact that the playwright has aimed at pleasing the audience, instead of at producing a good and satisfactory play. Instead of doing the work as its own integrity demands that it should be done, he has falsified the play by putting in this or that which he thinks will appeal to the groundlings, who by that time have probably come to want something else, and the play fails by its insincerity. The work has been falsified to please the public, and in the end, even the public is not pleased. As it is with works of art, so it is with all work. When we really think of works of art that have impacted us, it was the works which were authentic and done as a labor of love, and did not feel like they were focus grouped or walking on eggshells to please people. There are a lot of tricks and low-hanging fruit known to appeal to an audience, like providing a power fantasy or validating them to make them feel good about themselves. But does this really edify them and make them better people? Pandering does not actually serve the community. Only true work does, as the book says. The only true way of serving the community is to be truly in sympathy with the community, to be oneself part of the community, and then to serve the work, without giving the community another thought. Then the work will endure, because it will be true to itself. It is the work that serves the community. The business of the worker is to serve the work. There's so much slop content and entertainment out there, which have no meaning and have no lasting value. People are yearning for more. It's a wonder how so much about the hollowness of the modern world relates to the corrupted vision of work, the big lie. The desire to appeal to the market is often motivated by financial gain, but in the end, not even the public is pleased by what is being made. Sayers writes, "We are coming to the end of an era of civilization, which began by pandering to public demand and ended by frantically trying to create a public demand for an output so false and meaningless that even a doped public revolted from the trash offered to it and plunged into war rather than swallow any more of it." This is the fate of the society that views money as the purpose of work. But we don't have to participate in these attitudes. We can resist the spiritual poison by adopting the right attitude toward work, where work is its own reward, secular work is treated as sacred, and that we should serve the work primarily and not the community. It will imbue our time working with significance, and the work itself will have a better impact. Work is what we were made for, and it's one of the highest potential pleasures of life. Maybe if enough of us lived by this, there would be a real revolutionary change in our society. For me, these ideas on work had a large impact on how I thought. I was doing work which did not align with my values or feel meaningful, and I rationalized that it was just a way to make money so that I could later do things I was more passionate about. But I couldn't help but be miserable in my situation, and I also witnessed how cynical and exploitative the corporate world could be. But now, I have a better vision on what work should be like, and one of the ways I'm applying this philosophy is by doing the best work I can for these videos without worrying about the audience or numbers. I will not use AI, even if it makes production faster, since I feel like it ruins the soul of the work. So hopefully this video is able to bless you. If you liked the perspective that I drew from, you should definitely look into Letters to a Diminished Church by Dorothy Sayers, which has a ton of great insights into many topics, not just work. And if you're interested in learning more about the biblical vision of work, check out my video on fruitfulness and the purpose of life. Anyway, thank you for watching, and God bless.